Greetings to readers, viewers, and listeners, and welcome to this next edition of a virtually brand new topic on the Autistic SuperChannel. This one for new viewers is called The Power of the Prompt. What it is that on the autisticsuperblog.wordpress.com, which you all can check out, you guys will, I mean, what they usually do is they give us prompts in order to talk about what we want to talk about within the context of the prompt in question. In this one, it's called the prompt is, what topics do you like to discuss? I mean, I always like to consider myself an open book when it comes to my autism and my autistic burnout. I mean, I feel like I always like to make sure that I'm open, authentic, that I'm not trying to be a fake. I'm not like I try and be humble. I mean, I don't want to come off as anything other than myself. That's always been the thing I've always thought about. I'm always willing to talk about philosophy, religion. I will not talk about politics for any reason, most because of how divided the country has been since the elections, and the fact that I want to just bring up something that WWE Hall of Famer Mick Foley once said during One Night Stand, that when it comes to politics, I've got friends on both sides. I've got friends Democrats, I've got friends who are Republicans, conservative, all that stuff. I always like to make sure that I'm always open to anything else other than politics, because how am I going to be able to discuss some? How am I going to be able to discuss politics with someone whose mind's been made up? Um, for myself, I like to talk about game shows, and I mentioned so many other game show websites like buzzardblog.com, the legends that are there. Um, Tell us about yourself. Tell them what they won. Um, which are podcasts that I'm into, and I'm also a big fan of Inside Jeopardy or This Is Jeopardy. Um, I've always I've always wanted to talk. Wanted to talk about Bob Barker. I mean, The Price is Right got Racist Soul. Um, I always like to consider myself a huge fan when it comes to game shows and autism. Obviously, I always like to make sure that I'm always doing everything that I can to make sure that I'm not trying to be a fake, but I also want to make sure that if I do talk about things, it's only because I know the things I want to talk about, and I want to be able to give a fair, unbalanced reference to anything I talk about. Um, but one of the things I always like to do, and one of the things I always do, and this is kind of the reason why I like moderators for certain things, I always like to listen. I always like to hear both sides of the story. Because, like I said before, it's always one thing to hear one side of the story, but if you hear from the other side of the story, it really makes things seem a lot more understandable. It makes conflicts more understandable when you see things from one side, from both sides of the board. But there's also a problem with that. You also have to filter out what's fact and what's not, or you also have to keep the opinions of the people involved and try to be neutral. And sometimes that can be a bit of a challenge. Um, but I also feel like listening and being able to discuss anything, right, for myself, I won't talk about religion or anything like that, um, because, like I said, I don't want to. I mean, I want this to be a positive place. I want the Autistic Super Blog, the Autistic Super Channel to be a positive place where people can always feel that they can talk about anything, that they can discuss about anything. And I should know that I have live chat on me with me. So if you guys want to talk or discuss anything, you can just leave it in the chat if you want. I freely admit, I mean, I'm also willing to talk about wrestling, obviously. but I also want to make sure that I don't get overwhelmed. There's such a thing about myself as an autistic individual being overwhelmed when it comes to hearing from devouring one wrestling, then another wrestling, like WWE, and then watching AEW, and then watching New Japan. It's a lot, and it can make you feel overwhelmed. And as I mentioned before, 2 years ago, it could also lead to autistic burnout for me because I'm devoting all my time to these things, and not letting other things kind of get in the way. I always like to make sure that it's kind of the reason why I do the Super Blog versus for WWE stuff myself. Not that I don't like AEW or not that I don't like New Japan. I respect them both. I respect them both, and I respect Lucha Libre and all that stuff. But I feel like too much wrestling, and I feel like any wrestling fan could say this, that too much wrestling at once kind of feels a little intense. It just kind of feels like there's a lot, like there's a lot of things that you might miss. Um, so it's like you could feel like you can feel well educated about wrestling, but you want to make sure you're not overwhelmed. And it kind of makes you feel like a rogue wave, like the one in The Perfect Storm. You don't want to go up something like this and then realize, oh my gosh, what did I get myself into? That's kind of the whole idea of why I do the Super Blog versus for WWE events, because I don't want to be overwhelmed, um, because I know how frustrating it can get. But I'm absolutely very much willing to talk about autism. Like, it is who I am. And I've learned a lot about myself, especially during the 2 years since my autistic burnout, which is a real thing. You can check it out on other things on YouTube if you want, on other channels on YouTube. But I've learned a lot about myself during the time of my burnout. I've realized that my poetry is how I process my emotions, about how certain things can happen, and I've sometimes I feel like my anxiety, my feelings have just ratcheted up to an up to an amount that I never even thought of before. Um, but I am getting off topic. The re- I will talk about anything at all, anything anyone wants to talk about. But the one thing I do not want to talk about is is politics because that's a dirty business. But if you like these video, that's going to be it for my response to this prompt. If you guys like these videos, you can check me out here on the Autistic Super Channel on YouTube. You can check me out on Blue Sky, Instagram, X, Facebook, all that stuff. But wherever I am, you can check out all my videos on the Autistic Super Blog to WordPress.com. Until next time, dear readers and viewers and listeners, stay safe, stay strong, and as always, shine on.